Any tourist visiting modern Beijing will naturally have made arrangements to tour the Great Wall. This series of fortifications, unlike any other in the world, stretches for a total of 8,850 kilometers, a distance greater than that of the Arctic Ocean to Panama, and which is estimated to have used over 45 million cubic meters of brick. More than 2,200 years old, it began as a series of packed earth fortifications to delay and channel the horse archer raiders to the north, which would ride in periodically, terrorizing the sedentary population, pillaging and slaughtering, and riding off with livestock, with silk, with women. From the very beginning of China's imperial age, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, the man remembered today for his immense terracotta army, began the process of unifying these various early walls with a brutality seldom matched in the millennia to come. He would raise taxes by 90% and then enslave into a work crew anyone that fell even pennies short. Qin Shi Huangdi was perhaps the most brutal and murderous tyrant in history up to that point, with as many as 2 million Chinese dying under his reign. Tours can be arranged, with English-speaking tour guides and a lunch provided, along with free time along the wall. Tour companies will bus you up to one of a few sites along the wall, the main ones being Badaling and Mutianyu, which the People's Republic is dedicated to maintaining as a tourist location and UNESCO World Heritage Site. These tours often can be combined with other offers, and you can, for example, also tour the Forbidden City, the imperial palace of the Ming and Qing dynasties, which is the largest imperial palace in the world, sitting on 180 acres and comprising 980 buildings. Or, you might choose to see the Ming tombs, 40 square kilometers worth of mausoleums from the ruling dynasty of the Ming, located in Chongping district, and walk through the lush greenery and ornately carved statues of Chinese folk creatures, such as the QILAN and the Lungui. Located about 20 kilometers from central Beijing to the northwest is the Old Summer Palace, most famously used as a summer retreat for royalty during the Qing dynasty, though it can trace its origins all the way back to the 12th century. This, too, like so many relics of the imperial age, is now a tourist attraction, centered on Kunming Lake, a picturesque, tranquil lake where royalty once vacationed. The palace itself is located on Longevity Hill, on the northern shore, yet one can find temples, bridges, and sites all around the lake. To the south, near the island of the Heralding Spring, you can find Yeh-lu Chu-tsai Temple, where this statesman, Yeh-lu Chu-tsai, one of the founders of China's Yuan dynasty, which for the first time brought together roughly the entire landmass of what is today considered China, is buried. Entombed along with him are his wives and concubines, which were slaughtered so they could join him in burial. Yeh-lu Chu-tsai, ethnically a Khitan, who could trace his lineage back to the rich and powerful Liao dynasty, valiantly served the Liao's successors, the Jin dynasty, which had overthrown the Liao. He was a gifted student, well-versed in Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist literature, and spoke Mandarin, Jurchen, and Khitan. Indeed, he may have been the last person in history to have been able to fluently speak and read Khitan. He stood about 6 feet 8 inches tall, and by the age of 25 already had a beard that reached all the way down to his waist. When the Jin fell, that dynasty's successors named him Ertu Sakal, literally Longbeard. In 1234, with the siege of Tsaizhou, the Jin dynasty finally fell after more than 2 decades of prolonged assault from their northern barbarian neighbors. The invaders had been relentless, having fought 2 other major campaigns during the invasion of the Jin and having annexed Korea. Yet the Jin was one of the most militarily advanced and well-defended states on the planet. When they finally fell, their invaders inherited what remained of their governing bureaucracy, Yeh-lu Chu-tsai among them, who, as a good Confucian, and cognizant of the Chinese mandate of heaven, which determined which faction had the divine right to rule China, accepted his conquerors as a legitimate ruling dynasty that he, as a civil servant, was honor-bound to serve. The absorption of this bureaucracy was significant because it was the first major civilization these invaders had conquered, which still had significant remnants of their government and society intact. Both the Xixia and Khwarezmian dynasties, campaigns fought and won while still engaged with the Jin, had roughly their entire governing apparatuses annihilated during the conquest, as with large portions of their populations. Now, with the Jin, the question arose, what do we do with it? Agade, the Khan of this conquest empire, called together a council of his brothers, uncles, warlords, and commanders, what is referred to as a Kurultai, to answer that very question. The conquest of the Jin had not been undertaken for the land or the food grown there, the resources one could find there, but as a rather elaborate revenge scheme for what had happened to Agade's grandfather and an ancestor long before. Now they'd won, this Chinese empire was theirs, and these northern barbarians had no real plans for what they should do with it. Attending this Kurultai was Yeh-lu Chu-tsai, there as a humble administrator, to answer technical questions and provide administrative details. These invaders were a simple people, herdsmen on the northern steppes. The Great Wall had done little to stop them. They valued wine and women, yes, but the real mark of wealth for these people was the size of their herds, particularly their horses. Horses were nigh on sacred to these people. They were seldom slaughtered for meat, though sometimes they could be sacrificed in shamanic rituals. So the suggestion naturally came up at this council that they should just exterminate the population of this former Jin dynasty, all of it, and convert the land to pasturage for their horses. This was the North China Plain, after all, fertile lands that could easily become grassland. Their horses would love it, and it was an area more than twice the size of their homeland. It was Yeh-lu Chu-tsai that objected to this idea. He'd accepted the legitimacy of their rule for some time now, and had served them since he'd been absorbed into their fledgling empire, and he'd come to blows with this Khan before. Agade was used to the soft heart of his Chinese administrator, and when Chu-tsai objected here, Agade probably rolled his eyes and sighed, for he belittled the men before the rest of the Kurultai, saying something like, "Are you going to weep for the people again?" Chu-tsai sagely replied, giving Agade the sound advice that an empire may be won on horseback, but it cannot be ruled on horseback, a lesson from Chinese history going all the way back to the Han dynasty. He suggested instead that the people should be allowed to live and instead taxed, and that could generate wealth for the invaders. Finally, Agade was persuaded and agreed, and Chu-tsai was the man he put in charge of this venture. "You have a year," he was told, "to generate some revenue, or we go back to Plan A." This advice that he gave Agade can be seen as a turning point, the moment those invaders ceased being marauding barbarians and became a global empire. The people of the Jin were saved, as many as 13 to 23 million Chinese spared. Although, by that point, perhaps as many as 20 to 30 million of them had already died in the conquest, quite possibly the worst hemoclysm history had ever seen up to that point. The siege of Zhongdu, modern Beijing, almost 2 decades earlier, had seen massacred even the cats and the dogs, and the streets would be drenched in human fat for years. Prisoners of war were forced into the vanguard, the ones that charged forward with the ladders to absorb the arrows of their fellow countrymen. The city was reduced to cannibalism and ash. Stories abounded of 60,000 maidens that had thrown themselves from the walls to avoid rape. This barbarian war machine was not finished yet. In the next few years, Agade would have his armies smash, essentially simultaneously, both the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights in Hungary and Poland. The Knights Templar would report that there was no stopping them from reaching the Atlantic. Agade's successors would add 3 more Chinese kingdoms to the empire, and have battlefronts as far afield as Japan, Indonesia, Palestine, and Finland. Within a mere 45 years after this Kurultai, which arguably birthed the empire, it would grow to become the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known, encompassing more than 50 nations and spanning more than 120 degrees of longitude, the entire length of the Silk Road, and 2 continents, an area larger in size than the continent of Africa, and holding sway over perhaps half of all humanity alive at the time. This all began 7 decades earlier. Mongolia is one of the coldest, harshest, most desolate places on Earth. The modern capital of Ulaanbaatar is considered to be the coldest capital city in the world, surpassing Ottawa and Moscow. This was a land of loose clan ties between nomadic herdsmen. And it was here, in 1206, that a 44-year-old warlord, Agade's father, was crowned Genghis Khan, the leader of all those who dwell in felt tents.